What we're going to hear now for 5 minutes is about the connection between economics. Let's welcome Ian Hanna.
Thank you, Chairman Dennis and gallant friends. Next week in Australia, starting on Monday, the numbers are about 2,000 of next year's one-year-olds will be butchered, and they'll be the putting to death of those 2,000 will be paid for. It's a business. The abortion industry is a business. It's not. It's government funded. The people that are doing it aren't doing it out of some compassion for the unmarried mothers. And the rest of the story is that of those 2,000 a week, the quick maths are that'll be 100,000 for the year, which is the quick maths again is 1 million over 10 years, and that's just in Australia, and that's the real Holocaust. But the figures on that, on those numbers are that 90+% of those abortions are performed for social and economic reasons. So a lot of what we've talked about here today is cause and effect. If an expectant mother is going to lose her job because she is having time to have a child, or perhaps the employer won't re-employ her, then that income that she is going to forego is just so important to a lifestyle. And so perhaps there's an economic argument as well. But I suppose what I'm trying to get across today is that the people that, and I'm only a very a casual bystander. There's a chap called Graham Preston who lives in Brisbane who pickets abortion clinics, and the conversations I've had with him, it's about the loneliest ministry that you can. It's about the loneliest thing you can take on. He goes to prison. The reason they jail him is not because of what he does, but he won't give them an undertaking not to do it again. So they put him in prison on remand, and I thought that the prison part of it would be somewhere like Palin Creek, a prison farm, but no. And they put Graham into prison. They put him into Arthur Gorrie with the hardened criminals and the murderers and the rapists. But the interesting thing that Graham says in prison, the prisoners, as you do, they say, "What are you in for, mate?" And he tells them, and they say, "What?" And they know that they're in there for a reason, and they can't see that Graham has done anything wrong that lands him in prison for weeks at a time on remand. It's a very lonely undertaking to speak out in the cause of the unborn. And the other interesting thing is, often you see people come here from overseas countries and they say, "I can't believe how blessed you are in Australia," and they relate things that have happened in their own country. But if you're a farmer in Australia and those, incidentally, that 100,000 abortions, that's about 30%. The quick maths are, if there's 100,000 born, if there's 100,000 don't make it, who are killed in the womb, there's only something over 250,000 live births in the country. And if you're a farmer and somebody said, "Oh, your sheep or your cattle, you're going to lose a third of them," straight away you'd get the DPI or the vet in. You'd get somebody in to try and correct the problem. But in Australia, it's just as I say, it's just about the loneliest cause that you can have anything to do with. And if you're someone intending to come from here, from somewhere where they thought things weren't so good, and if they knew some of the things that were some of the downside of Australia. Incidentally, you probably heard the other day that the suicide rate in Australia is now more than car accidents. We all know about the carnage on the road, but there's something in this country that's making people kill themselves wholesale. And I suppose the other reason why I'm keen to get up here and say something this afternoon is there's a proverb that says, if anybody else has sort of got the same burden that a lot of us have, there's a proverb that says that we should open our mouths for the speechless and for all those that are appointed to die. There's there's a psalm that says, I've not hidden your righteousness in my heart. I do not restrain my lips. And even better in, and this is following on from what Nick was saying. Thank you. We're dying out, and we shouldn't hide ourselves from our own flesh.
Of debt. Now that's unusual for somebody that's involved in the financial area. She is a loan writer and a mortgage broker. And would you come up, please? And her passion is for people and honesty, not something you always find within the financial area. She has 3 children, and they've grown up now, although it's hard to believe, and she homeschooled them. And what a wonderful idea that is. She is talking about the financial crash. Who thinks we're in or about to have a financial crash? Hands up. Most people. Well, what a better opportunity than hear about that now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Well, it's certainly interesting times that we're living in, isn't it? When I first agreed to do this talk, the financial system wasn't as it is at the moment, which is certainly posing some very difficult situations around the world. But obviously my PowerPoint is not working, and I actually wrote this on the board in case the PowerPoint wasn't working. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects something that never was and never will be. Written by Thomas Jefferson, a great man who had a lot of wisdom, who was also facing the same types of problems that we are today. Baron Nathan Mayer Rothschild wrote and said, "I care not what puppet is placed on the throne of England to rule the empire. The man that controls the British money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the supply of money." And that is the root of the problem. If you trace the money and the supply of money, that will reveal to you the corruption of this world. And that corruption is enormous. Its tentacles just don't cease. It's just mind-blowing. And in fact, Thomas Jefferson also wrote that a man that reads nothing at all is more informed than a man that reads just newspapers. So hey, well, back then, are we faced with the same problems now or what? So, okay, we're sort of we've got a wrecked car. My daughter's actually a panel beater, and that's her computer. So, okay, then I'll move on. And the first part of this talk, it's a very, very complex subject that I wanted to cover. And I wanted you, in the end, to see how much power the banks actually have. Okay, so firstly, money. What is money? Most people don't spend much time wondering what money is. Their major concern is how much they have, how much, and how to get some more. Usually the question of what money is arises only when money ceases to function properly. Money should be a medium of exchange and a store of wealth. Throughout time there have been different forms of money, and money can be whatever people agree on as a medium of exchange. As long as people have faith in that medium of exchange, the currency maintains value. A good, honest currency is tied to a store of value, such as gold, as we heard by one of the speakers earlier. A bad currency is tied to nothing. It has no store of value. The notes we have in our pockets and in our bank accounts, they are not wealth. They are the illusion of wealth. They are notes issued by government decree, and what the government gives, the government can take away. They used to be receipts for gold, and they used to be tied to a gold standard, but they are tied to nothing now. This is actually called fiat currency, where central bankers can print money as they see fit. The Reserve Bank, as with central banking elsewhere, are private banks. They are not government banks, as they would have us believe. They operate as cartels to protect their interest and prevent any newcomer entering the market. Is fiat currency a good thing or a bad thing? Fiat currency and fractional reserve banking are at the heart of all our problems in society, and have been for centuries. They are a Babylonian satanic system. So let's look at a closer look at fiat currency. This currency is not backed by gold or silver, which is hard currency. In the 1970s, the Western world governments pulled away from the gold standard that tied their currencies to it. And that was by not tying our currencies to gold and silver, it allows currencies to collapse through hyperinflation and devaluation of our currency. Fiat currency always ends in disaster. It always collapses. Governments grow and individuals lose rights, as there are more and more regulations and control on the citizens. Devaluation of the currency is also known as inflation. Currencies have lost 95% of their value since 1913. If we look at the value of gold in 1930, it was around $21 an ounce and was able to purchase a good quality man's suit of the day. If we look at the value of gold, now it is around $850 an ounce and still able to buy a good quality man's suit. But that $21 is lucky to buy you lunch today. So what has changed? Is there a different material quantity in the suit? Is it taking different amount of labour to manufacture the suit? If anything, the suit should be cheaper to make. But it takes more dollars to buy the suit, just like a house. It still has the same 1930s house. It's still got the same bricks in it. It's still exactly the same as what it was in 1930. It just takes more of your labour or dollars to purchase that house. It is a little like owning shares. If two people are the shareholders of a company, but behind your back someone else issues some shares to another two people, it effectively means that your shareholdings have been diluted. Instead of having a half a share in the company, you now have a quarter of a share. Your share value has been devalued. The difference is the effect of inflation on your dollar, where you lose purchasing power, which is a hidden tax on your wealth. However, for the person who issues the currency, they have the full benefit of the full value of that currency, where the end user pays the price of the devaluation of their currency. So when new money comes into the market, the price of a loaf of bread might be $1 a loaf. However, in 6 months' time, that same dollar may only buy you a half a loaf of bread, thus costing you $2 to buy that same loaf of bread. The end user pays with a loss of purchasing power. Now, for people on fixed incomes, this is an added burden they can ill afford. These are the people who suffer the most with inflation, or the increase in the money supply, which is what it really is. The middle and lower classes. Those who benefit from the increase in the money supply are those who issue the money, as well as governments and those awarded the government contracts, the first users of the money. Oh, okay, can you go a few more slides? Governments tell us that the inflation rate is around 3%. And if that was so, the price of fuel would only have increased by an insignificant amount. But it hasn't, nor has food and other consumables. So what is happening here? The government uses hedonics to calculate the rate of inflation and removes all the nasties from the inflation figures, such as food and fuel. Inflation should be calculated by the increase in the money supply. If we use the increase in the money supply as a basis for our inflation calculations, we would see an inflation rate more like 14% as opposed to around 3%, which is the official figures given. If we could graph this on a chart, we could easily see that as each year goes by, we need more and more dollars to maintain our lifestyle. So you would have a graph that would be had on a very slow graph. That's the official figures of a 3% incline as opposed to a 14. You can see that over time, that gap becomes bigger and you need more dollars to maintain your life. We would also see that pensions and other wages would have to increase at the rate of 14% and not 3%, costing the government millions in extra payouts. But is inflation all bad? After all, we all believe our houses are going up in price. And isn't that a good side of inflation? No, it's not. Why is it the next generation has to suffer by those added prices? Prior to central banking, there was no inflation for 100 years. The price you paid for the house was the same price your sons, your daughters paid for a house. And if you wanted to make money from real estate, you had to add labour to the property, such as renovations or developments, to increase the price. Isn't that fair? I think it is. Imagine for a moment 100 years without inflation. Your loaf of bread stable for 100 years. Fuel, interest, running costs of business. Wow, it's just difficult to understand how that works. We have become so accustomed to the effects of inflation. Without the burden of inflation, we would be a nation of savers and live abundantly. The Federal Reserve Bank came into being in 1913. Slowly everything began to change. Interest rates fluctuated, dollar values altered, money supply increased and decreased as central bankers chose. They create all the money cycles. They allow money to flow by making it accessible with lower interest rates. They then restrict the supply of money and rein it in and drop it out of the circulation. And then that creates a credit squeeze, is what it used to be known as. All these processes made the rich wealthy and the poor poorer. By the continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved the wealth of the nations. A foot ruler came into being as a measurement of a king's foot at the time the king reigned. So for a king with a large foot or a king with a very small foot, such as a child, the measurement was not consistent. And those who were in a position to take advantage of a new king could make purchases in advance. Thus, by having that inconsistent measurement meant that some had an unfair advantage over others. Eventually, the measurement became standardised to 12 inches. Money and measurements have to be considered consistent. But just as the example of the king, so money changes take unfair advantage of the change in interest rates and currencies. It is the same as central bankers dictate the rate and then take advantage of the profits produced by that on the stock exchange, the futures and derivatives markets. It's a bit like having tomorrow's newspaper when you go to the racetrack, when you're making all the rules. The bankers create these business cycles by the flow of money, and along with government they position themselves in the marketplace to take advantage of the known cycles. The problem with most currencies is that those who issue the currency cannot help but create more currency than they should, because those who issue the currency have the benefit of the credit it supplies, while others pay the price of that created credit. President Woodrow Wilson, 1913, said, "Some of the biggest men in the US in the field of commerce and manufacturing are afraid of something. Are afraid of something they know that there is a power somewhere, so organised, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, pardon me, so perverse, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." In the absence of a gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. Deficit spending is simply a scheme for the confiscation of wealth. Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as a protector of property rights. If one grasps this, one has no difficulty in understanding the banking elite having an opposition to the gold standard. It's a value that is not easily manipulated. Famous quote from Sir Josiah Stamp, who was Governor of the Bank of England. "Banking was conceived in iniquity and was born in sin. The bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create deposits. And with a flick of a pen, they will create enough deposits to buy it back again. However, take it away from them, and all great fortunes like mine will disappear as they ought to disappear. For this would be a happier and a better world to live in. But if you wish to remain the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let them continue to create your credit." There are three ways a nation is conquered. The first is by war, and it's most common. It's a very expensive process. The second is by religion. But the third and the most effective is economic conquest. It takes the place when nations are placed under tribute without use of visible force or coercion, so that the victims do not realise they have been conquered. Tribute is collected from them in the form of legal debts and taxes, and they believe they are paying it for their own good, for the good of others, or to protect all from some enemy. Their captors become their benefactors and protectors. Although this is the slowest to impose, it is often quite long-lasting, as the captors do not see any military force array against them. Their religion is left more or less intact. They have freedom to speak and to travel, and they participate in elections for their rulers. Fiat currency is a currency that has no backing and can be freely printed. Fractional reserve banking is a system where money can be created out of nothing and issued into the community as a debt. As you have here, the old money was a receipt for gold, and it actually stated on the currency that it was. The problem with fractional banking is there is no money to back the depositors if there is a run on the bank. The money is issued as a debt without the money being circulated back to pay back the debt. So they give us a debt, but there's not enough money in circulation to pay back all the debts that are out there. So people are in bondage. Can I have the asset and liability? Yep. Okay. This is actually how money is basically a ledger sheet from a bank. You have one side which has got your liabilities, the other side which is your assets. So you as a depositor, you first go into your bank and you deposit $100,000 into your bank. That's actually a liability for the bank, because the bank actually technically has to pay you back at some stage. However, it's also cash and reserves, so it goes into the other side as an asset into the ledger of the bank. But on that, I only need to hold 10% of that as a holding. I can create 90% of that money. So now I have a balance of $90,000. So I can lower that down into the loan section of that, and now I've got $90,000 that I can now loan out. So you come along, you want a car loan, so I now deposit that car loan back into your account, so it's now another deposit. So I can create some more money. So this process of creating money can go on and on. From a deposit of $100,000, I can create $1 million. Although the 10% holding has been lowered to nothing percent in some countries. So what is their dollar worth? Whenever money comes into the bank as a deposit, be it your wages, account transactions, etc., the bank can continue to create money even on short-term deposits. Of all the city buildings, can I have the next one? If you see all the city buildings, how much of that do you think the people actually own? Who owns that? Who owns that landscape? It's the bank. The bank owns it all, but how much does the bank actually risk of its own actual money in all that real estate? You can see that I provide the money by putting in my deposit to the bank. The bank has actually put in nothing in the deal, stands to make everything. I am creaming you all. That's the right, your house may be worth $500,000 and you provide a bank with a 20% deposit, allowing the bank to create another $1 million to charge you a variable rate on that loan, which keeps you again in bondage. And if you default, the bank ends up with a hard asset in exchange for a credit entry that they gave you in the first place. What a deal! Who wouldn't like that? I think we're all in the wrong business, actually. Now, the bank can go and arrange another loan against that real estate and have someone else pay that debt again. So Mr. and Mrs. Average, can we move to the next one? Mr. and Mrs. Average, take out a credit card. Say $5,000 now, being in the mortgage industry, $5,000 in this day and age was a very low credit card debt. I had some folks who actually kept their credit cards in a bucket and just tipped the bucket out. Things did not go well for them. If we say there are 22 million people in Australia and 10 million people have a $5,000 credit card, that equals to $10 billion in credit card debt. If we charge a $15 a month account keeping fee, that equals to $55 million a month from the bank that I am getting. If we charge 15% interest on that card, I get $1.5 billion in interest from credit cards. That's a pretty good deal. I again put nothing into that deal. That's just a bit of plastic. So for credit cards, which are just a credit entry, the bank is making huge profits. And Australia has only got a population of 22 million, but America has 300 million. How much do you think is the cash flow that is going to the banks? If we expand this out to include housing finance, business loans, commercial phones, commercial funding, the largest by far is government loans. All your taxes pay all the debt for your country. Who do they pay it to? Back to the bank. How much money do you think I'm making? This is so many noughts, I don't even get my head around it. There's so many noughts. Now, because I am creaming off so much money from you, I'm like this great big vacuum cleaner. I'm going and sucking the lifeblood out of every one of you. And with that, I can now create anything I want. I buy governments, I buy countries, I buy whatever to enslave you, the people. That is my goal. World banks want to own the world plus 5%. They actually are quoted as saying too that a farmer cannot have more sheep than he can afford to feed. They believe there are too many useless eaters on the face of the earth, so they intend to scale down the population, and severely too. So, in essence, we've heard about a lot of problems that are in our community, but our real problem is banking. Our real problem is that every time that we go into debt, we're providing credit, we are actually financing the banks who turn around and destroy us. We need to stop the flow of capital running to the banks. Right? We need to get out of debt. We need to stop borrowing. We need to stop buying stuff we cannot afford to pay for. My father was in Harvey Norman. He was overwhelmed at people just rushing in, buying all their plasmas on 2 years interest-free stuff. You know, it's stuff you don't have to have, but it's crippling us all. We need to get out of debt, stay out of debt, and stop the flow of money. But unless we bring back that, the right to print our own money is for the people. Under Section 51 of the Constitution, it is our right to print our own money. We've been swindled over everything, but we've been swindled out of that right to print our own money. And if we had that right back in our own hands, we would be abundantly wealthy and not enslaved as we are now. We would have righteous type governments. We wouldn't have all the issues that we have right now. It's because the politicians and the bankers are in bed together, for want of a better term. And therefore that corruption just flows through to every section of our community. And you really need to understand that very point. The last one, please. The last one is in the People's New Testament, 1 Timothy 6:10 says, "For the love of money is the root of all evil." Not the money itself, which, if used as by a steward of God, is a blessing, so much as the love of it. The greedy love, this greedy love is the source of every sin. Men murder, cheat, lie, rob, run saloons, gambling houses, brothels, all for the love of money. For the love of money, Judas sold his master. Thomas Jefferson says, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever." Now, very, very briefly, we are in an economic crisis at the moment. But the worst thing is to have on more debt. And I believe, this is now my private opinion, this is not backed up by anything that I've read just a moment, but I believe that central bankers are lifting the ceiling of debt on countries to put the countries in further bondage. So it gets to the point where this $750 billion bailout